The majority of the news that populates the newspapers and websites in the world, a lot of it comes from a very, very tiny number of news agencies. And they ultimately kind of control that news flow, and that's really scary.
Far too often they just repeat what they're told by these big moneyed interests rather than providing the social function of journalism, which is holding power to account.
A lot of people, particularly on the yes side, felt like they weren't really being represented, and they were right to think that, because out of all of the newspapers in Scotland, only one, the Sunday Herald, came out to back yes, and that was only a weekly newspaper.
It is possible to take on and attack a dominant message. And that is one of the most interesting things about the referendum, for me as a social scientist anyway. As the pressures, the attacks upon the yes side of the referendum increased, the actual vote for that side also increased. So it was exactly the opposite of what you'd expect. Young people communicated essentially with each other, laterally, horizontally.
In all polls around the general election, it was widely recognised that the two key issues for people were the economy and the NHS, in all the polls. So they should have been given, according to Election Unspun, roughly similar amounts of press coverage and TV time. In fact, the economy got more than triple the amount of coverage. So what does that say? Again, the Tories were seen as being strong in the economy for no good reason. As I say, they were complete failures by any standard, including their own. And the NHS, which Labour was seen as strong on, was completely underreported, especially during the very last week of the election, where the NHS dropped off all discussion whatsoever. It dropped out of the top 10 points of discussion in the press.
The problem has come where, rather than there being funding for journalism, there's that collapses, and so who gets to decide what we hear in the news? People who can pay public relations experts to go and tell journalists what to write about. People can push into the hands of a journalist and easily concoct a story. He'd been doing a lot of work around how HSBC was shutting down bank accounts for Arabic men particularly, for no particularly good reason, and he thought this was particularly unfair, and the Telegraph repeatedly refused to publish those stories, despite the fact that this is their chief political editor. And gradually he came to realise what was going on was that the Daily Telegraph had a massive advertising relationship with HSBC, and as he saw it, that was, as he put it, a fraud on their readers. The paper was refusing to tell the truth. And you'll remember then later unfolded a massive scandal around HSBC and its use of essentially money laundering for people in Mexico. And again, the Telegraph barely covered the story.
In fact, we know Roland Fairhead, who's the chair of the BBC Trust, was also the chair of HSBC. We know one of the other directors of the Trust was also a CEO of BAE Weapons Systems. So we know at the moment it's not controlled by the people, but we'd like it to be.
Real hard news journalism means people have to have salaries. They have to go down to a court case and write out what happens and sit in court and write about it. It takes time, it takes professionalism, it takes skill, and that means you've got to pay people to do it.
Yes, we do need to support local news and news alternatives because we need to guarantee our systems, our methods of collecting information. And this information is absolutely vital to making democracy function. We need to hold power to account, and we need to tell the stories of everyday people, of people in society, and what's going on, and how can we help there. If we're not informed, we can't work out what the solutions are.